Good evening and welcome to a special edition of KOB8 News, a streaming edition. Tonight, I'm Emily Spain. Thanks for joining us. We are partnering with the Columbia Missourian and Midwest Studios this evening to bring you a forum between candidates running for the City Council here in Columbia. We are streaming live from the Midwest Studios in Columbia, and we want to welcome all of our viewers joining us on our various streaming platforms. And tonight we're focusing on two open seats on the Columbia City Council for Ward 3 and Ward 4. So let's meet tonight's candidates. Running for Ward 3 is Roy Lovelady. Roy, thanks for being here tonight with us.
Thank you for having me.
You own 360 Star Styling Studio. You're also the founder of the People's Defense. That's a local organization with a mission to lift diverse voices within our community and also address the separation between local government and its community. Roy, thank you for being here. Hoping to win re-election in the 3rd Ward is Mr. Carl Scala, who has served 4 terms on the council so far, also currently Mayor Pro Tem. And Scala was also the Vice Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Carl, thanks for being here.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Now to the 4th Ward, Nick Foster is joining us tonight, and you've worked as an executive director at the Voluntary Action Center in Columbia for more than 9 years. Nick, thanks
Retired
for being here.
in 2020.
There you go.
There you go.
Erica Pefferman, finally, our final candidate, also vying for the 4th Ward seat. Erica is the owner of Columbia Marketing Group and Como Magazine. Erica, thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
So here's how tonight will work. I'll pose a question to all of the candidates, so we're going in alphabetical order tonight. You'll have a minute to respond, so please try to keep your response to that minute, and you'll hear a little beep towards the end of the question. And we'll have final say on when to move on to the next topic. And we have a producer helping keep time, and you guys all see the monitor in the room as well. So let's get started with our first question tonight. We want to learn a little bit more about you and why you think this place we call home is so special. So Roy, we'll begin with you. What makes Columbia special to you, and how would you work to make sure that the things that you cherish about this city stick around?
So what makes Columbia special to me is, for one, this is my home. I've been here since I was 13 years of age. While being here, I've had the opportunity to network, communicate, start a business, graduate, move away, come back. What I would do and what I cherish about Columbia is the people. I'm very active with the people. I love hearing what they say. I love going out and attacking missions to make people's lives better, which is part of the reason why I even want to run for council. So Columbia is home to me. and my mission is to see it thrive. I've went through several processes where started at the bottom and I worked my way to the top, and I want to be exemplary for people who look like me, for people from the LGBTQIA background, just a diverse group of people in which I represent. So Columbia is home to me, just like it's home to others, and I stand for the people.
Okay, great, thank you. Carl, what about for you?
Yeah, I've lived here for about 42 years now. I came here to go to graduate school at MU and finished graduate school here, and then worked for the university quite a long time, for many years before I picked up this avocation that we call politics with the city council. So I think what makes this a very special place is the people, obviously. I agree with Roy about that. But it's also the culture and the diversity of the culture. Being a college town means that there was lots of drama and music, and drama in the best sense. There is also some drama in politics, but there is lots of opportunities to not only develop yourself, but watch other folks develop. And as a psychologist, I've always been appreciative of small group dynamics and the work that goes on with local governance.
Okay, thank you. Nick.
Well, we moved here in 2010. We came here when my wife took a position at the University of Missouri, teaching in the College of Education and now Human Development. I was looking for an opportunity to stay in nonprofit work, and finally ended up at Voluntary Action Center. While I was at VAC, I came to appreciate so many things about the city. VAC provides a lot of different services, and because of that, it put me in touch with a lot of different people in the community, in nonprofits to be sure, but in the for-profit community, in education, in service organizations, and politics, the government. I had to make application to the city for funding as well as others. But before we moved here, we were living someplace we really liked a lot, and we were sad to leave where we were living. But I can remember being here very vividly. My wife and daughter and I sat in almost the same spot just yesterday eating lunch outside Glenn's Cafe. My wife and I had been out to eat, and we were on that boulevard between the two columns on either end, the sets of columns on either end. Oh, and I said, this is our town, and it has been ever since for so many good reasons.
Okay, thank you. Erica, what about for you?
I love this question. I'm in love with our city. Both my businesses are named after our city. I moved here in 2005 from Joplin, and my children were very young at the time, and I have 5 kids, 23 to 14, and the oldest were going to school at the time, which was Lee Expressive Arts, and now is Locust Street. And there were 23 different languages spoken in that building. And I was just overwhelmed and just in love with the diversity that our city had, the independent restaurants, the district. We had live music, there was theater, there were museums, there was just anywhere that you looked, the sports at the university. I was able to find what I wanted for my children and an environment to raise them in without having to move to Kansas City or St. Louis or even a bigger city than that. So to me, I think Columbia is amazing, and I get to write about it every month in the magazine. So there's never a shortage of things to love about this city.
Awesome. Thank you all for your answers to that question. Let's dive into a more serious topic here and move our attention to crime in our city. Frequently, we hear the discussion focusing on crime in the downtown area late at night. What is your understanding of the crime situation in Columbia, and how would you address it? And does your concept include the idea of community policing? And Carl, will begin this round with you.
Wish I had more than a minute to talk.
I know.
But yes, since I first was elected in 2007, the number of police officers has increased 18%. The number of firefighters has increased to about 13%. I often tell the story of a very successful pilot program that we initiated a few years back with a different administration, different city manager, and that is there were 3 underserved areas. Eventually they were expanded to 4. In the first ward, the second ward, and there were 2 that were put in the third ward. And we sent social workers around to knock on doors to see what people needed and to see what people wanted. And what they returned back, the conversations that we had really talked about simple solutions that weren't very expensive, street lights and sidewalks, those kinds of things. That program was discontinued, unfortunately, by a previous administration, and I regret that because the violence rates and the policing rates in those areas went down by 20%. It was a very successful program.
Okay, Carl, thank you. Nick, what about for you?
Everyone in the city, wherever they live and wherever they work, needs to feel that they're safe where they are. I recently talked with a gentleman who works downtown, he told me, and I asked him what his primary concern about the city was, and he mentioned crime. He said that he's worked downtown for about 17 years, and now he's afraid to leave late at night from his place of work. So we do have an issue, but I think that along with community policing, which I support, we need to address the root issues that lead to crime. We've got to address poverty in our city. We've got to address the issues that keep some people from being able to access all of the opportunities that all of us want to. So adequate income, addressing homelessness, because that is also a contributing factor to it. So I think that's at the root of it. We want to go to, we need to get to a place where we stop pulling people out of the river, as Desmond Tutu once said, and go back upriver and find out why they're falling in.
Okay. Erica.
Absolutely. The answer to your question is, I think there's no other way than to have a robust community-oriented policing policy, and having our officers have the time and the bandwidth to develop relationships within the communities, the different communities within our community. They're not able to do that right now. They're short-staffed, drastically so. We've lost 10 police officers since January. We are underpaying them for what the market tells us that they need to be paid. And they make less than any of the law enforcement agencies around us. They're doing required 12-hour shifts at minimum, and they're tired. So when we ask them to invest time getting to know people, that is a process that takes a minute. So we have to have enough officers that have enough time to get out of their cars and talk to neighbors and speak to people. And we can't do that under our current pay structure with the compression that's in place with where it is. So we have to be very innovative when it comes to recruitment and retention with our officers, and we need to make sure they have the resources that they need. And that includes time and training and money.
Okay. Roy.
Okay, so when I heard this question, I heard you asked about crime downtown, community policing, and basically how would we fix it. So first I will say that crime is happening everywhere inside of the city of Columbia. I would like the urgency that they used when putting those lights downtown and addressing crime downtown throughout 3rd Ward and other wards, because crime is everywhere and we have a crime problem, so it needs to be addressed. Community policing, yes, I would love to see community policing implemented throughout the city. Now, when talking with Chief Jones said that community policing is just good policing. Well, sometimes I think that taking a guardianship approach to policing versus a militant approach to policing would be great. So community policing would definitely be a plus. I understand that we're short-staffed. I understand that there's a trust gap between the citizens of Columbia and the police. So there's a lot of work to be done in order to fix the crime issues.
Okay, all right, thank you. Nick, you kind of brought up our next question here. We're going to talk about the issue of homelessness within Columbia that we're talking a lot about recently, especially some of the activism and support that's been shown in direct asking the city for more support, like a homeless resource center, use of city buildings, of course, for those overnight warming centers and additional staff. What do you think is the appropriate role for the city regarding our homeless population? And Nick, this question begins with you.
Well, I've been working on this issue for a long, long time, and especially did while I was at VAC. There are a number of things that the city can do. One thing that I was recently pleased about was the city stepped up and provided a place for our room at the inn to extend the weeks that they'll be able to be open, because we're still going to have some cold nights. Tomorrow is going to be one of those, as a matter of fact. So the city has opened the event center for room at the inn, and I was out there yesterday, and it's amazing how much space there is there. It's a great place for it. So I think what that indicated was some initiative on the part of the city to meet a need that is immediate. And it says that there are immediate needs that can be met, and the city can do that. Beyond that, the city can convene, can help support financially, but also by helping to guide the efforts that are going on. That's already happening. There's a lot of work that's being done cooperatively among all the agencies who are doing this. I'm grateful that there's a lot of interest in this right now, and I think we have some great opportunities immediately ahead of us to significantly address issues related to homelessness.
Okay, Erica.
So the interesting thing about when you ask about homelessness and mental health and poverty and workforce development, these things are all connected. None of them live in a vacuum by themselves. And so the thing about homelessness, I feel that the city, the role that we play is, I feel that this is a perfect opportunity for our public-private partnerships. So the city can finance structures, opportunities for people to have places to go, but then offer those opportunities to manage them to the nonprofits that have the experience, the ability, the systems, the processes in place to be able to do so efficiently and effectively. But you can't just solve homeless. People that are homeless often also fight addiction, also have mental health challenges. So the Mental Health Crisis Center, I feel, is also a very important investment to put alongside a homeless center. And so when you look at these things, you have to look at them holistically. What are all the reasons why someone might find themselves, them or their family, homeless, and address all of that.
Okay. Roy.
Okay, so one thing my mother used to say is, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so if our homeless population is our weakest link, not saying that they are, don't get me behind that statement, then we need to reach out and help. How could the city help? I think that they need to communicate and have robust conversations with a lot of people who are already doing the work. As Nick and Erica both already said, there are a lot of people out there getting the ball rolling. That's how it ended up a topic of conversation right now that we're talking about. So we definitely need to communicate more with the non-for-profits, the private sectors, the people out doing the work, the grassroots organizations. Bring them all together. Let's create a robust conversation. One thing that's missing that I've noticed no matter where I've been in government, in non-for-profits, is the voice of the people who are unhoused. We need to hear those voices. So we need to make them feel comfortable in spaces so that they can trust and then give their true opinion about how to help them.
Okay. Carl.
I think generally speaking, it sounds like we're in agreement here. I mean, the city's role and responsibility is as a convener. It's also to defer to the private sector, that is the nonprofits, because that's where the expertise is. I think any of the candidates here, if they are successful, will also find out that it can tend to be a little bit frustrating when you're trying to follow some of the advice of the boards and commissions. For example, with respect to the Wabash Warming Center, there was some of us decided that we wanted to try and raise that temperature level to 32 degrees and have expanded hours and so on. But the way that the council decided that issue was to increase it to 25 degrees and have the cutoff for March 12th. Fortunately, the city manager decided to extend that with the measures that you decided, or that you talked about, Nick, and that was obviously a very good thing. But there you go.
Let's talk a little bit about those federal Arpa funds that the city is still deciding what to do with. No firm decision yet on how to spend those beyond establishing 4 categories for $12.5 million of the funds and a public engagement process for the rest of the $12.5 million. If elected, what would you do with the Arpa funding? And Erica, this question begins with you.
I always think this is an interesting question, because the decision is, made by council and agreed upon by priorities that are directed by the budget. With the ARPA funds, we have an opportunity to do something extremely rare. The rare is it that we have such a large nest egg given to us to do whatever we want with. I often think about the Armory that's sitting downtown, where this same type of situation happened, and we have a building that decades and decades later is being used for children and lots of activities all of the time that the community uses. I very much want to see us use ARPA funds for things that are sustainable, that will be here providing services, whether it's the Mental Health Crisis Center, the homeless shelter, things that will be here for us for decades from now, so that whatever it is that we invest our money in has a sustainable footprint that we can see that really served all citizens of Columbia rather than just a few.
Is there anything specific that you had in mind?
Yeah, I wrote about this month in my publisher's letter for my magazine. I think the Mental Health Crisis Center has to be funded. I'd love to see the facilities for the homeless be funded, ran by someone else, but the structure funded by the city. I think there are a lot of different opportunities for us to look into things that can happen. They are restricted to certain uses, so we have to look at what those are. But those are two that I think are extremely important.
Okay, Roy.
Thank you for this question. I have been a part of the coalitions, many coalitions, and many people who are talking about these ARPA funds. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if there never was a word ARPA, and what would people do if that money didn't exist. But since it does, there's inequities throughout the city of Columbia, and it was due to COVID. And that's what the money is for. So we need to address those issues in which the money said that it came for. There were a lot of businesses that went out of business. There were a lot of people who were unhoused, are still being unhoused. There is a lot of things happening behind COVID, and this was a relief from COVID. So I definitely would say I don't have any specific issues that I would like to address, but I would definitely like to engage in this robust conversation that has been asked for since the beginning of the ARPA funds, that was promised to the people, so that we can make direct actions in order to fix the inequities and the strife from COVID.
Okay, Carl.
Yeah, it's ironic that this was kind of a windfall, the ARPA funding, in view of the tragedy that was COVID. And it took a long time for the federal government to get around. As a matter of fact, just a few months ago, to really rewrite the rules to tell us what could be spent and what couldn't be spent. But the city council, and I was involved in this, decided to spend the first tranche of that $12.5 million, it's $25 million altogether, the first tranche of that $12.5 million for those four categories. And they importantly included homelessness and mental health and violence and workforce development. All of those things are transformative kinds of programs, and I don't really want to get into the debate about people versus projects, because I think there is sufficient funding to do both of those things, but I think we have a golden opportunity to invest in some of these transformative projects. And for the remaining tranche of the money, we've decided to have a very open public engagement process to deal with the other needs that the community has.
Okay, Nick.
Well, the way you put the question, it sounds like, what would I do with that money? Would that it were up to me. That would be a lot of fun, I think. But it would also be an incredible challenge, which I think the City Council has discovered, and the city has discovered. You know, sometimes it's something of a tragedy to receive so much money, because everybody wants it, and everybody wants to get a part of it, and everyone has strong feelings about how it can be used. So when the pandemic began, I had the thought that always occurs to me whenever there's a natural disaster. The people that are going to suffer the most through this pandemic are going to be the people who are already struggling the most, and that is true. So I think that when we look at the ARPA money, we need to keep that uppermost in mind. So I support fully the decisions that the council has made about these things that they've already determined the money will go to. But I'm especially glad that there's going to be a public process to follow up on that, so that the public has an opportunity to fully speak their own concerns about it, because this is something generally that the city needs to give attention to, I think. And in this case, we have an opportunity to do it that way.
Okay, so another thing that a lot of people like to talk about is trash here in our city, and we seem to be unable to come up with a solution that seems to please everyone. So what would your
no solution.
you could talk about that, Carl, here.
Yes.
So from roll carts to recycling, what, if any, solution do you think there could be to dealing with trash here in Columbia? And I think, Roy, it's your turn to go first.
Yes. Okay. So I've had the opportunity to look at some data, and that data shows that several other cities around Columbia are doing different things. Some are doing roll carts, some are still doing the pay as you throw, which we are doing. But one thing that I noticed about Kansas City, and this data was provided from the city, so it's public knowledge, it's public data. It was offered to or provided to the city council as well. So one thing that Kansas City is doing is no base pay, and you're allowing you to put out any trash bags that you like, and you get 2 for free, and then you pay $1.25 for the tags to attach to the rest of the bags. I think that that would be a great option for the upcoming months until that it's addressed on the ballot, or however the city council addresses it, and then it's put to ballot or whatever happens from there. But I definitely think that we need to change the trash immediately, and then we need to have this little timer.
Go ahead and finish your thought, Roy.
Okay, so I think that we definitely need to involve the community in a part of this process, as well as the trash the workers. And we understand that the solid waste is a valid part, and we understand that why it changed, and the big pickup items, which led to a lot of workman's comp claims. I think allowing that one to be put out for free and then charging for the other bigger pickup items is a great idea. And we don't want to keep putting trash bags inside of trash bags and putting more plastic into the landfills.
Okay, thank you. Carl.
Well, we're on the verge of a solution. It's not going to please everybody, but we will have a decision as to whether or not the city council chooses to take the ordinance out of the code of ordinances or defers to the public to have a public referendum to decide this. My preference is the latter, and I say that because I don't want to disenfranchise the folks that were in the majority by about 8 points in 2016 that voted to ban roll carts. I'm agnostic about this. I could go either way, and I'd be happy with either system. I think the system that you're referring to, Roy, can have some problems in it, because that was the purpose of having heavier quality bags. Now, we can get into the argument about what the quality of the bags, and that was a private sector failure, and frankly a city council failure not to hold them accountable for their delivery and their bags and so on and so forth. But I think we are on the verge of this solution. We are going to have a private, if you will, a hybrid system. And in 2016, as a matter of fact, I was part of the conversation that suggested that before it ever went to a referendum. Unfortunately, in my ward, there were probably 80 or 90% of the folks that wanted to ban roll carts. And so it was incumbent on me to make sure that I represented the ward according to what they wanted to have done.
Okay, Nick, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think if you ask any candidate who's involved in this process, they would love to say they would love to get to a point where we're not talking about trash anymore, because we constantly get this question, and there are a number of ways to approach it. I lived in a small town in Alabama for 13 and a half years where we had roll carts. I don't recall ever hearing anyone complain about them. So I think that's where I would like to get, whether or not it's roll carts. We want to get to a place where perhaps not everyone is going to be satisfied with the solution, but the great majority of the people do, and we're not having this conversation anymore. There is, by the way, I think they have been able to gather enough signatures to put this on the ballot, so we are going to have the opportunity to address it again. Roll carts I'm talking about. But I think this issue goes deeper than just the issue of trash, and it has to do with people in our community feeling confident about the city being able to solve a problem. But this is an opportunity, and we have an opportunity to address it in an effective way. And I think if we address it that way with that intention, then we have a chance for a real significant win here and a way to move forward not only on this but on other issues as well.
Okay, Erica.
Well, I think when the day comes that this goes on the ballot, we're going to have record turnout for voting. We do hear about it a lot, and I think it has become a bit of a joke, when we talk about, because everyone in the city really wants to talk about trash, when we really want to talk about crime or homelessness or things of that nature. The challenge to me is that this should be simpler. It should be more common sense. There should be a solution. Many cities have figured out how to deal with this, and we are smarter than this. And I think what I have figured out in my research and talking to people is that it comes down to the city council seems to have a trend of not listening to the staff and the recommendations that come from staff. When this particular issue was solved the last time, it seems to me from what I have heard from staff at the time is that they suggested a 5-bag limit and not providing bags, but the point being reduce trash in the landfill. And what happened was, it seemed to be, we went to this, which was much more, even more minimized, plus having the branded logoed bags, which ended up having the quality control problems. So it just seems to be something that we really need to take a step back, identify what will work. There are enough smart people in the city to figure this out and move forward and explore every option on the table.
Speaking of a 30-second rebuttal here for Carl, I wanted to give you a chance to respond.
I heard this from you, Erica, at the last forum as well, and I was there, and there was no such 5-bag suggestion that ever came before the City Council. The suggestion was, with the system that we have now, and the reason it was put in place for 2 reasons. One, it was a pay-as-you-throw system, which also would be involved with roll carts. But it has reduced the amount of trash going into the landfill by about 20%. It's increased recycling as well. So it's been somewhat successful. The problem, of course, was the private sector's failure with their contract to guarantee that they would distribute the bags and have them available.
Yeah.
And a quick rebuttal from you,
Yeah,
Erica.
my office is downtown. I have an office right at 9th and right south of 9th and Broadway. And I think you would find a lot of business owners who pay for commercial trash to tell you that that is not actually the case, that the residential trash has not decreased. It has moved into commercial dumpsters that are located downtown and other places around the city. So we haven't really solved the problem, we've just moved the problem.
Okay. And real quick, my last question about trash, hopefully, is you all have kind of mentioned this upcoming vote here that's City Council is going to be discussing the ordinance on the ban of roll carts on March 21st. And either they'll take a vote, Council will take a vote about eliminating that ordinance, or they will choose not to take an action and it will go to the ballot in August. So if you were elected, and obviously Carl is currently on council, to decide, would you defer it to go to the ballot, or would you go ahead and vote to eliminate that ordinance that bans roll carts in Columbia? And Carl's turn to begin.
Well,
Thank you.
I've already let the cat out of the bag, because I would prefer to let it go to the voters, just for the reason of not disenfranchising the folks that voted before. It was defeated by about 8 points. There were people that complained that it was a little confusing and so on. Perhaps that was the case. But I also suggested that most of the people in my ward, I would still be getting abuse from folks if I would have voted for that. So I was relieved to have it go onto the ballot. I will be relieved again if it goes onto the ballot, and we'll do whatever the folks want. But the action is just going to remove that ban from the ordinances. Then it's going to be a process that we have to engage the public to determine what is it that they want in terms of a hybrid system, roll carts, or any of the rest of this. So that will be a public engagement process. And I think finally we can put this nightmare to rest. I get more emails about trash, I think, than anything I have ever gotten in my experience on City Council. And Ray Beck, the first city manager that I worked with, said, if you want to create a controversy, you just have to bring up folks' trash.
Yeah,
and he was right.
Impacts all of us. Nick, what would you do?
Raise a wise and experienced man. I don't think that I would vote in council to address this. We're at a place now where there are a whole lot of people who've put a lot of effort into gathering these signatures. It would be unfair to them, at least, for the council to go ahead and make this decision. So I'm for that going before the people and for them having an opportunity to vote again. What I'm most concerned about is the ballot language and whether or not it's clear to people on exactly what they're, and I know what you're going to say, Carl, that's not up to us. I'm just saying that's a concern. And so yes. When the time comes, the people who are on either side of this issue, or multiple sides, as many as there are, need to do a really good job of educating folks about what they're voting on or for or against, and what it's going to result in. One of the things that I discovered in having this conversation, someone told me that I said something about accommodation, and there are some folks in our community, particularly older folks, who are concerned about roll carts in this way. There's already accommodation for people who have trouble with the bags, that they can be picked up. Whatever is going to happen as a result of this, I'm confident there will be accommodations for those who will need them, and I think that's another thing that needs to be clear to people before they vote.
Okay, Erica.
Yeah, the answer to your question is very simple. Again, it shouldn't be this hard. It's common sense. I would definitely allow the people to vote on it. I think that even though it was defeated before by an 8-point margin, as Carl says, I think the saying, be careful what you wish for, I'm not sure people understood, and I think they really, 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 really wish they had not at this point. So I think it would be simple. You know, if it goes to the people, the current ordinance will be overturned, or they will ask for a different way of doing things. If council were to do it, if we were forced to do it, I would totally vote to remove that ban from the ordinance. I don't think we should ban any potential solutions to challenges that we're facing. And so that would be my answer.
Okay, Roy.
And I'll keep my answer very simple. Of course, I would vote it for it to go to the people. I am a people's person, and their opinion is ringing loud and clear right now. They want their voices heard. And so you definitely want it to go to the people and go to the ballot, and then, once again, a robust conversation. And I think that the conversations must be had and heard. It's a difference between just having a conversation and listening and then effectively applying what you're hearing. So we must make sure that the people, we are listening to what people are want and making sure that, again, I'm echoing everything that they have already said about the ballot and making sure that it's understandable for all. And I think that it's going to be a different turnout this time, because trash is a high topic right now.
Yeah.
One thing, and that is,
Sure.
remember, if it goes to the ballot issue, it will not be voted on until August.
Right. Right.
So,
Can I just point out one thing really quickly?
Sure.
The reason I knew what Carl was going to say is, guess what? We've been talking about this a lot.
yeah,
So.
yeah, you read my mind on this.
So I think we're done trash talking,
Yes.
right? All right.
All right.
Okay, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about growth in Columbia. Some in our community see zoning rules as promoting growth over preservation of affordable housing and abandonment of downtown. What do you see as the appropriate approach to Columbia as we continue to grow? And this question goes to Nick
That's
first.
me. Our city is growing, and it has been for a good long while. It's going to continue to grow. The question is, how are we going to manage the growth that is ahead of us? Right now, there are conversations between the city and the county to come up with a West development plan. The city already has plans in 2 other parts of the city. I think that they need to be revisited. But as the West development plan is being developed, I think it's really important that we pay close attention to what that development plan is going to mean once it's put into place. The Unified Development Code needs to be, the UDC needs to be reviewed. But what I'm hopeful that we'll see as we're annexing other parts of the county into the city, which seems to be inevitable, that we have in mind developing walkable neighborhoods, that we're very attentive to transportation in and out of those neighborhoods, that we make them the kind of neighborhoods that are characteristic of the city as a whole. And I think that's where a lot of the concern is. We want to maintain, this is a great city in which to live. We want to maintain that. So as we're growing, whatever it takes to be sure that we hang on to that, that needs to be a part of our intent.
Okay, Erica.
One of the things that I've had the privilege of doing for the last 7 years is visiting other cities with a delegation from the Chamber of Commerce. And during the course of all of those visits, we've been able to study what other cities have done when they face development, when they face zoning, their airports, race relations, the homeless, social issues, policing, a lot of different topics. Development has been key at 2 cities we've been to. Fort Collins was a city that limited growth, put basically a wall around the city, and what ended up happening was the workforce was not able to afford to live in the city that they worked in anymore. So they had to have big commutes. Their sales tax dollars were spent somewhere else. They lived in other cities where their property taxes were paid, and you just couldn't afford to live there. Athens, Georgia, which is where we went this last year, really had a great solution for multi-income, multi-use, affordable housing that was administered through their housing authority. And I think what they had was a really cool opportunity to look at it. You cannot solve an affordable housing crisis without building. And the challenge is that there's so many people hear the word development and building and they immediately think that's a bad idea. We have to build inventory so that people have a place to live.
Okay, Roy.
Well, when I think about growth in Columbia, I also think about my business. Well, when I started my business, I started in a one-room studio, and I wanted it to grow. And so eventually I moved into a two-room commercial property, and now I'm in a large building. And I think that that's the same thing that's happening to the city. Now, what's happening is certain areas are developing faster than other areas. When I look at Third Ward, which I'm running for, and so I'm concerned with its issues, it's developing quite slow. So I do know of a few sorry.
No, you're fine.
A few businesses as well as affordable housing that's coming to the area, but it's not thriving as well as the rest of the city. So when I look at Third Ward, we definitely need growth. My particular area where I live has a walkable neighborhood. So grocery stores are closed. Some businesses. I live near Route B, but another thing, when it comes to transportation, it's not that far. So when we're developing and we're thinking about infrastructure, we're thinking about transportation, we're thinking about affordable housing, we need to do all these things through an equitable lens. Okay. And so development is inevitable.
Sure. Carl.
Well, here's another one of those. I wish we had a lot more than 1 minute to talk about. We've been talking about this for years. I kind of grew up on it in planning and zoning early on, and then eventually on the city council. It's always been an issue, if you will. And we are going to grow. We have to grow. I mean, without growth, you die, essentially. There was someone who said that at some point. But so we will. It just depends on how. I was a past president of the Smart Growth Coalition here, the Boone County Smart Growth Coalition. And those are the kinds of principles, Nick mentioned some of them, walkable cities, transportation, a sense of place, increased density, all of those kinds of things. We also think about how we're going to pay for these things. And at various times we've had initiatives for essentially growth taxes, if you will, or growth fees, you might call them development fees. We have a very low development fee. We have to consider to the extent to which that we are subsidizing growth and the extent to which that we can encourage the private sector to grow in a responsible manner.
Okay. There were complaints last year about the lack of transparency in the search for the new city manager. How should the council keep the public more informed when conducting searches for important city positions? And perhaps how would you have kept the public informed had you been on council at the time? And Erica, I'll begin with you.
This is a pet topic of mine because I'm a professional communications and marketing person. So I constantly look at ways in which those messages can be improved, and that includes a dialogue with both parties. The city has done a good job recently creating the Be Heard initiative, but that's brand new and just been rolled out. The city struggles in talking about our story, what's happening in many different areas. They're really terrible at it. So what I would recommend is that we have a strategic approach to what is our strategic plan, our goals, and how we're communicating, have a communications plan for each of them, and especially as it relates to recruitment and retention of employees, especially even more so as it relates to director level and above. There are 204 vacant positions right now within the city, many of the several director level positions, which speaks to the culture currently at the city as well. So communications is an extremely important part of it, and I would ask the city manager to hold those people to a higher standard.
Okay. Roy, what do you think?
As I've said several times, communication is big. I'm not a communication major, but I definitely would address it. So before there was a process in which engaged the public, as well as they privately went through the applications, selected, and did interviews, but that knowledge was public. And so my question will be, why did it change? Because if the system was working before, then why not go back to the system that worked so that the people will have the opportunity to, when they did their interviews of the candidates, that they obtained the knowledge so that they can make sure that the candidate that was being chosen was the right candidate and they felt in support of. Now, I support the Carl C. Wood because the selection has been made. So since the selection has been made, we got to put our trust and our faith in the Carl C. Wood because it's happened. But if you gave me the opportunity, I definitely would involve the community in the process so that they could have their voices heard. They're the first leg of this three-stool government.
Okay, thank you. Carl.
Let me answer both your question and Roy's. I wish that we could have used the last system. I was here for the last city manager to just determine who that was. It was a very different environment in those days. There were a lot more applications. We initially had about 30 applications for this job. We narrowed it down to 5 or 6 with the same firm that we used before. But because of the insistence of the finalists, and we wanted about 3 finalists to give folks a choice. We wanted to have them meet all the department heads and so on and so forth. But at the insistence of the candidates, the finalist candidates, there had to be confidentiality, and very strict confidentiality. I was amazed. We had to have one meeting in the library so that people could go to the library so that their employers would not see that they were applying for this job. And in the end, we got the best choice. We picked Carl and Seawood, but 2 of those candidates who insisted on confidentiality withdrew before the final pick.
Wow, never knew that.
Yeah.
So since you educated us all on a little of the back end of what happened, I'm going to give you another opportunity here to talk about, moving forward, what would transparency-wise for these types of roles?
I think confidentiality is such a big deal these days when it comes to hiring. The hiring environment is so difficult. One of the things that I regret in the last few years that the City Council has abandoned, and that is we used to go on retreats. We used to go on retreats with all of the department heads and the city manager, and we'd usually go to a place like Lake of the Ozarks or something like that. But it was more than just filling us in about what was necessary and how to get the budget established. It was all about socializing and getting to know people. We've lost that capacity. Now we have retreats, but they're on camera. They're on the dais. It's just like a regular meeting. And we've lost a lot in that kind of give and take.
Nick.
Erica and I had the opportunity to meet with Carl Seawood recently, and he has in mind doing that again, and I would support it. I have to say that I was frustrated by the process. It sort of seemed to me that there might be something that the council could tell us about the process. What I comforted myself in is there seemed to be some unanimity among the council about that process. So if you have a sense of trust in any one member, at least, of the council, you could have a sense that the process was going along in a way that would end up in a good result. I'm pleased with the result of it. In a way, it's sort of water under the bridge. I think the challenge is, though, that we take seriously the kind of feedback that came from people in the city wanting to know more, and always ask that question: what can we say that will keep people informed, even if there are things that we can't talk about out loud? I think Be Heard is a good idea. I'm glad to see it. It's only a first step. It's a very static kind of thing, but this is an issue that I think we need to address. To truly engage all of the people in the community will take a real strong effort, and I think on the part of every member of the council to be present and proximate to the people that we're serving, and then be able to hear and respond to them.
Okay. Columbia has set some aggressive goals for mitigating environmental impact here in our city. For example, there's a goal of being 100% renewable by 2035. Do you support those goals of the city, and do you think they are realistic? And Roy, we'll begin with you.
Do I support the goals? Sure. Do I think they are realistic? I think that they have the potential to be realistic, but we have to think about the cost of what it takes in order to create some of these issues. And I know that we're all going to talk about the coal contracts that the city is under, but that's one separate issue on the table. So we must start getting the ball rolling anyway. So when I think about solar panels and electric cars and different type of emissions, those things are expensive. And if I'm at a place where I may be able to afford some of those, but not all of those. So how do we address that for everybody equitably? I can't afford everything. I'm sitting here saying it. So if I'm being 100%, that means I have a car that's probably an electric car, and I have solar panels that can store. So I think that we can work towards and get the ball rolling. I do. I think we'll be 100%. No.
Okay, Carl.
The answer is yes. I spent 13 years as not as the chair, but as a member of the Environment and Energy Commission, which eventually turned into the climate change group, if you will, that developed this. I think we can be aggressive with those goals. It's possible that we won't make it, but on the other hand, that's what a goal is that's what it's for. I think equity, like Roy suggested, is absolutely essential because that has to pervade, and it does pervade even our strategic plan in terms of equity in several different categories. But I also, and I think Nick did as well, received the endorsement from the Sierra Club, the Osage group in Sierra Club, by responding to their questionnaires. And this was one of the questions in that questionnaire was, do you support that aggressive role? And incidentally, it was in about 2005 or so with Ken Midkiff. I can remember sitting down and drafting the first renewable portfolio draft of the ordinance that was eventually adopted by the City Council at that time.
Okay, Nick.
Well, I was endorsed by Sierra Club Osage, and I'm really grateful for that. Climate change is one of the 4 top priorities for me in this campaign. And I think that the CAP, the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, really sets the bar for doing plans for the city. And there are a number of reasons for that, but all the reasons for having the plan and the immediacy of this issue are well spelled out in it. Equity is right there at the front of it, which I think needs to be right at the front of every plan that we make in this city. If we can address equity in an effective way, we're going to address any problem that we face for everyone in the city. So I do support the goals that are there. In fact, I support the goal of getting to 100% renewables by 2030, which is a doable thing. It's not a simple thing, but it is a doable thing, and we need to strive toward that end. And so, yeah, one of the things about the CAP that I think is important is it's the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which recognizes that adaptation is something we need to be doing now. There are issues related to climate that are taking place for us here and are going to continue to happen. And so we need to be paying attention not only to the energy efficiency things that are there in the plan, but also to the adaptations that we need to make.
Okay, Erica, your thoughts.
Yes, the year is actually 2030. So in the next 7 years, the goal of the city is to have 100% renewable energy. And while I support that, I think it's an awesome theory to have and would love for us to hit it. There's zero chance we're going to hit it. You know, as a business owner that understands the expense of having to retrofit your infrastructure and talking to developers and business rental property owners about what it would take to retrofit their existing structure, the cost is enormous. So the only way, literally the only way for us to hit that goal is for the city to put their money where their mouth is and decide it's something that they want to invest in and incentivize that process. When I did a remodel on my last office building, we took advantage of the rebate program that the city has for changing out things like our light fixtures, and it was wonderful. It helped me reimburse the cost. It was a very expensive process, but it helped me reimburse the cost of that. My utility bills were amazing after that. However, I had to lay out the cash on the front end for it, and that was just light fixtures. So if we're talking about everything the city of Columbia needs for almost 150,000 people in the next 7 years, not going to happen unless the city funds it.
Can I speak to that?
You can have a quick rebuttal here.
Okay. I think it is possible. And actually, the plan calls for 2035. What we're looking at is moving that up 5 years to 2030, and it is possible because of where we would source our power from, and that's about purchasing power on the grid from renewable sources. As Roy mentioned, the fly in the ointment is the issue of the contracts we have with coal-fired plants. So that's something that needs to be addressed. But it is doable while we're doing all these other things that a lot of people like Erica have taken advantage of.
And Carl, quick rebuttal?
Just a quick one about the coal contracts. They were 45-year contracts when they were, and that was, I was off the city council at that time. I wasn't responsible for that, and I thought it was a bad idea. But nonetheless, we did look into the idea of renegotiating or pulling out of that with a class action lawsuit with several other cities. The penalties for doing that were cost prohibitive, which is why it wasn't done. Now, we should take another look at that, and because there were some disappointments that the Prairie State had in terms of representing themselves, that we may be able to cancel some of those contracts with less penalties. And I would look into that in the future.
And Erica and Roy, since Nick and Carl both had some other thoughts, do either of you want to add anything?
No, I would definitely just support looking into the coal contracts and keep the whole process equitable. I cannot say it enough. It needs to equitable. I love when I get tongue-tied. It gives me the opportunity to laugh and straighten it back out.
Word.
Yes. Equity should be on the forefront.
It's a big concept.
Yes, and trust me, I get it.
You know,
it is the challenge.
The challenge being, the cost has to come from somewhere. So just because it's 100% renewable energy doesn't mean it's going to be cheaper for the city to buy or have or maintain or use. So those costs get diffused down to people, and they eventually will end up falling on the shoulders of the people who are the least able to bear the brunt of it. And so while I do think, I love the concept of it, I think it's possible if the city wants to throw a bunch of cash at it, but that's the only way that it's going to work.
We're going to move on now to another topic that's been brought up a lot over the years in our community, specifically residents complaining about that disparity in police stops of automobiles and the use of no-knock warrants for searching homes, which we haven't seen here locally in our community, but obviously it's been a big topic of discussion across our country. So what's your position on these two practices that are seen as targeting members of our Black community? And remind me who's next this time. Carl.
Oh, okay. I see it as a huge problem. I serve with the National League of Cities on a council called Race, Equity, and Leadership. And that group has taken up this issue in some detail for many years. The group was established right after Ferguson, when there was a killing in Ferguson in 2015. And one of the issues with this has to do, that group, that council, Race, Equity, and Leadership Council, tries to educate folks about inequity, actually, and systemic racism and all those kinds of things. I don't think a lot of this is intentional, but it's kind of built into the system that the police officers, and I've gone along on ride-alongs. Actually, my daughter was a police officer in Columbus, Ohio for 15 years. But they are looking for these small details about lights out or registration kinds of things. And we need more groups to help with those, to help those folks avoid those kinds of issues so that the police can respond to more important things than just stopping folks. And sometimes they get into difficulty with this whole equity issue.
Okay. Nick.
Well, there seems to be little difference of opinion about the way that the numbers show that there are disparities in our police and what happens with traffic stops in our city. And it's been going on for a good long while. I think that the police department has tried to address it and is continuing to try to address it. I believe that that's sincere, but it's still there. And when the Mayor's Task Force on Violence issued its report some years back, one of the things that they cited is that there is a lack of trust among the Black community in particular and the police. And when these kinds of numbers continue to show up, that's one of the things that we need to be concerned about. So there are a number. This is another one of those very complicated issues that we could go on and on and on about. But as long as there's that lack of trust, and as long as we're seeing these kinds of numbers, we've got something that we've got to continue to address. And so I'm going to support the police department in doing that in an effective way.
Erica.
It's very clear that there have been disparities in the data. I've had the opportunity to sit down and look at the data with several different people, and it's really pretty interesting once you dig into it and look at all of the different factors that come into it. The police officers that I've spoken to, and I'm the only candidate up here endorsed by our local police officers union, they want the same thing. They want to earn the trust back of the community. They want good police officers. And so they've made strides. They've hired and made efforts towards their diversity, equity, and inclusion. I personally think one of the biggest steps that we can take is having diversity within the ranks of the police officer. officers. And I have encouraged looking at how can we do a grow our own program, much like we have with the CPS. With CPS, there's an opportunity for local students to go fully paid scholarships to local colleges, become teachers, spend the first few years of their teaching here at CPS before they move on. So how can we duplicate a successful program like that for our police department so that there are more police officers that look like the people that they're pulling over?
Roy.
And as the only Black and brown person up here, speaking from experience, my trust with the police may not be as strong as others. Have I been a victim of being pulled over for a traffic light or a small incident that has gone awry that's not been de-escalated but escalated to a different situation? Yes, I have. So for us to say it doesn't happen in Columbia, it truly does. And how does something that is, if you're pulling me over for a traffic light or for maybe I didn't signal, how does it escalate to an arrest? Are these arrestable offense? So how do we fix it? And I definitely say it will be in the training. But as Erica may have said earlier, that they're working 12-hour shifts. And when it comes to training, they're getting it whenever they can, here and there. And some of the training is not even required. I learned that from the Citizens Police Review Board, that all training is not required of the police officers. So when I'm approached by different police officers, I don't know what training they have. I don't know how they're going to handle me. So one thing that I would definitely say is we need to result back to the hiring and the training of the police officers. I understand that their workload is heavy, but hey, my skin should not be a threat.
Roy, thank you. We're wrapping up our last couple minutes here of the forum, so I want to give you all a chance to, if we can change the timer to 30 seconds, a quick recap of what you hope voters walk away from as far as why they should vote for you, and yeah, let's just end on that note. What do you hope voters walk away with tonight, and why should they get your vote at the ballot in August? And Roy.
You want to start with me?
Yeah, let's start with you.
Okay. I would love for voters to vote for me because I'm honest, I'm integral, I'm dependable. I'm just a regular citizen who took up a job and a responsibility to run for city council. I've spent the last 19 months going to every city council meeting, minus two, but I've learned so much already from that experience. And through that experience,
Finish with that.
through that experience, I want to communicate that back to the communities so that they could be a part of this governing process and let them know that their voice is as equally as important. So when you go to that voting poll on April 5th, check Roy Lovelady for 3rd Ward. Thank you.
Carl.
Well, I've spent a little bit more than 19 months attending city council meetings. But I think what I would like to leave folks with is the notion of continuity of office, of some institutional memory of office. I happen to be the senior member on the city council now, and I'm hoping to ask folks for their vote. They can go to scalaforcouncil.org if they want more information about what I have to offer.
Okay. Nick.
Everywhere I've worked in 40 years of professional life, service has been my life through all of that time. When government is at its best, it's providing services to its community in a way that's effective and meets people's needs. I know how to do that, and because of my experience, I believe I can take that experience of service to the council. I would invite people to go to Foster 4 4th, all spelled out, foster44th.com, to learn more about me and hopefully to gain your support on April 5.
Okay. Erica.
I think that I bring a lot of experience to this race. I have been a business owner for a long time who's had to retain and recruit employees and be innovative and creative. I've traveled to 7 different cities studying everything that makes up a healthy city and looked at lots of new innovative ways to do that. And I've been on service of boards, many boards, for 17 years where I'm part of both advisory and governing boards where the job is to manage the executive director and the executive director manages the staff. And that is the same way our city council is structured. So I have 17 years experience of being in a role that will be very much like this one. And I hope that people will vote for Erica Pefferman for 4th, and you can go to my Facebook page to learn more.
Okay. Thank you all, Roy, Carl, Nick, Erica. We appreciate all of your time tonight, and we've reached our hour.
We need another hour.
I know, we could talk
Not
about this
available.
forever. We could talk about
It's not
trash for an
available.
hour, right? And so for anyone that missed a part of the forum, you can access the full forum. It'll be on all of our platforms later on this evening. So on behalf of the Columbia Missourian, Midwest Studios, and KOMU 8 News, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you tonight at 10 on KOMU 8. Have a great night.